Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, you told me what we were doing on today's show, and I thought, oh boy, this is basically like an off-season version of one of our bold prediction
Hmm.
shows. But the pressure is off of me this time because this is just you talking about stuff that you have predicted to happen. So for once, I don't need to carry one of these bold prediction shows. So I am very excited. Tony, are you feeling the pressure?
No, Tom, but like all of those other bold predictions, you won't actually give any bold predictions. So you should feel very, very comfortable. And the thing is, we're talking about what I've been doing for like the last week or two, this 50 for 50 thing, just looking at the college football season upcoming, some Ohio State things, and in each one of these that I do every day, I'm given an Ohio State prediction. The thing is, Tom, I am so accustomed to being bold in my predictions that there has to be a little bit of boldness here, or else it's just like I predict Ohio State will beat Indiana. I could do that. Then maybe you would feel much more. This would be right up your alley. Like, oh yeah, ooh, that's something that you would predict boldly. But there has been a little bit of a level of boldness. So I want to go through as many of these as we can in the time that we have allotted. And you can go ahead and give your thoughts. You can judge your boldness. Like, well, that's not, there's no boldness there. And coming from you, I mean, you are the expert in no boldness. So I would be able to take all of these. But this first one, Tom, that I want to talk about, based on the amount of talking that we've been doing about this player, doesn't seem all that bold until you figure in the amount of times that it has not happened. And that is Jeremiah Smith will have a 2 touchdown game in the regular season this year for the Buckeyes. Now, remember, he is a true freshman wide receiver. And you see that, 2 touchdown games in the regular season. Tom, when you first read that, you're like, of course, right? Yes, this is going to happen.
Of course, that's going to happen, yes.
And when you consider that it has only happened 6 times, maybe ever, but 6 times in the last 40 years, you can't just say, oh, this is definitely going to happen. But if any of these predictions that I'm going to talk about today, that we're going to talk about today, are definitely going to happen, it feels like this is definitely going to happen.
It does, and I think when you go through the list of guys who have done it before, you sort of figure, okay, yeah, it's doable, but it takes a pretty remarkable player. The list, as you put in there, is Chris Carter, who is an NFL Hall of Famer, Dino Dawson, 404 file not found, Michael Wiley, David Boston, Devin Smith, and Chris Olave. So outside of Dino Dawson, that's a group of big name, future NFL standout players. And it feels like Jeremiah Smith is kind of right in that company. Now, the only thing that gives me any pause here is you look at, Garrett Wilson's not on that list, for example. Marvin Harrison is Marvin Harrison was Marvin Harrison should be on that list, shouldn't he?
Regular season, Tom.
Oh, regular season. You're right. Yes, regular season. So, yeah, it is pretty exclusive company there. But when you look at Jeremiah Smith and where he was ranked coming out of high school and what we saw out of him in the spring, it feels like that's the company he should be keeping, and that's the company he really probably likely will be keeping. So, yes, this is something that is very, very difficult and requires a very special player to accomplish. But I think he is a very special player and he should be able to do this. I would expect him to do this at some point. That could be the Akron game. Like if I told you, he does it in the Akron game, I don't think that would be remotely a surprise because you would expect he's going to get a decent amount of run and he's probably going to have a physical advantage over the defensive backs he's going to be playing in that game. And I don't know that Akron is in a spot where you're coming in and it's like, well, you've got to stop Travion Henderson. Oh, you got to stop Quinshon Judkins. Oh, you've got to, there's a lot of guys they've got to stop. I don't think stopping J.J. Smith is going to be the first task on their list, which means you're probably going to see some single coverage, which means you're probably going to see some big plays. So, yeah, we'll talk later about most likely or least likely. I think this is going to be very high on the most likely to happen list on the things you're talking about.
Well, and Michael Wiley, who was a freshman, who was a receiver as a freshman, that's why he's on this list, so people aren't going to be well actualing us. He also scored 3 times actually in his first game. 2 of those were receptions, 1 a reverse. So I can he match that record? And Tom, I'm even wondering how long into the bold predictions will Jeremiah Smith scores a touchdown not actually like is it a week 1 thing? Can I say dibs on that one in week 1 that he scores a touchdown, and then after that does it no longer become a bold prediction? I guess it depends on whether or not he actually scores in those first few games, and we'll go from there. But Dino Dawson, 4 catches as a true freshman, 2 of those for touchdowns. Towards the end of the season, he caught a couple of fourth quarter passes and blowouts from Jim Carsados, and then eventually transferred on to, I believe, Kent State as a senior. Next prediction, Tom. Ohio State senior defensive end Jack Sawyer is going to score a touchdown. Now, on defense. Or, actually, I didn't even say defense. Just that he's going to score a touchdown. So if he does it on offense, all the better. But over the last 10 years, 10 defensive linemen have scored touchdowns for the Buckeyes. So you're averaging roughly 1 a year. 4 of those 10 have been defensive ends. 2 of those happened 10 years ago. So it has really been like 2 defensive ends over the past 9 seasons that have scored a touchdown. Usually it's them defensive tackles. They're the touchdown vultures of the defensive line, as we all know. But Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau has his touchdowns. It's time for Jack Sawyer to get his. This is a tough one to say, like, oh, this seems likely. This is a complete crapshoot, honestly.
It is a complete crapshoot because, how is a defensive lineman going to score? Maybe it's an interception. You go, I think I'm just thinking back to defensive linemen who have scored on interceptions in the past. And I think Haskell Garrett had one on maybe a tipped pass. I know Draymond Jones had one on against TCU, and he intercepted a little shovel pass or something like that and ran it back. But it's really kind of a fluke play, and you could just kind of pick just about anyone and go, that guy. And, sure, sometimes Jerron Cage is just going to pick up a fumble on the 50-yard line and run it back half the field for a touchdown against Penn State. And a lot of times this is like a strip sack kind of thing where there's just a loose ball and it's just who falls on it. So Jack Sawyer is as good a guess as any. And, he's someone who is likely to be coming off the edge and, have the opportunity to get the strip sack and, set up a touchdown and very easily he's right there. So he could fall on the ball. Offense, I don't think he's very likely to score a touchdown on offense this year. We can talk about if there's a defensive lineman, which defensive lineman is most likely to score on offense this year, because I think there's 2 possible answers there. But this is one where I don't think this is extremely likely to happen, like the Jeremiah Smith 2 touchdown one. I could certainly see a path to it. There, if you're doing a 1 point, 2 point, 3 point on bold predictions, Jeremiah Smith scoring 2 touchdowns in a game is somewhere between a half of a point and a point. This is probably a 2-pointer, but not necessarily a 3, just because it seemed, sure, you could absolutely see this, but this is not, Jack Sawyer scores a touchdown from the 17 or 34 yard lines. That would be 3 points to me.
That's yes, for sure. The 2 the most likely defensive linemen, Caden Curry being 1, Caden McDonald being 2. Do you have to be a Caden?
Yes, obviously you do. Spelling, irrelevant. Name, extremely important. I am personally, we are impartial media. I do have a little bit of a rooting interest in, I want to see a Caden McDonald touchdown, because that would be a nice kind of refrigerator Perry kind of throwback, because they've used him. The reason Tony's mentioning them is we've seen both of those guys used as fullbacks in, short yardage goal line kind of situation. I would, if they give Caden McDonald a handoff when it's, 56-3 against Akron, absolutely, let's see that happen. I still feel a little bit robbed, Tony, that Rob Landers had that long fumble return or whatever it was against Indiana a bunch of years ago and it got called back. I think the universe owes us a big man Ohio State touchdown on offense this year.
And don't you dare flag them for the celebration. Let them live.
No, that is immediate ref jail. If you flag a big man touchdown for any kind of celebration, there is no celebration that is too excessive to earn a flag there. That is, every celebration is an appropriate celebration in that moment.
Unless you pretend to be a dog and you're peeing like on the quarterback or something like that, then maybe back it off a little bit. Maybe. The next prediction has not happened since 2013. So boom, automatically bold. The Ohio State defense will pitch 2 shutouts in the regular season. Now, the last time they had 2 shutouts in a game was 2014. One of those was the Wisconsin Big Ten Championship game. That is not the regular season. 2013, they had 2 regular season shutouts. Now, the last shutout for the Buckeyes, Tom, do you recall?
The last shutout for the Buckeyes, was it? I have Cincinnati in my head. Was it Cincinnati? Yes. Okay. So
2019.
2019. Yeah. Okay.
42-0.
Yeah. And this is one where, every year I say never predict a team to go undefeated because there's too much silly little stuff that can happen, that to have all the things align just right. I think that's kind of broadly true with shutouts as well, that it's never, you're never smart to pick a shutout before a game because sure, it can happen, but think about how many bad teams Ohio State has played since 2019 and they haven't shut out any of them. I mean, sure, it will happen from time to time, and it would be very easy to say, well, Akron's not going to score on them, and Western Michigan's not going to score on them, and hey, Iowa's on the schedule this year, so you never know. But even, you go back to some of the terrible Iowa offenses. Terrible Iowa offense scored, didn't score against Ohio State in 22, but they did get a defensive score that year. So, it is hard, and teams are desperate to not get shut out, and sometimes you get the sad field goal at the end of games. And so, yeah, to think that they're going to get 2 shutouts in a season, it's absolutely possible, because I think this could be a generationally great Ohio State defense, and there were certainly some teams on that schedule who they could shut out, but you need a lot of stuff to all happen right. And then you need the third stringers to not give up. If you're playing Akron or you're playing Western Michigan and it's 56-0 in the fourth quarter, you need those third stringers to buckle down too and not give up any points there.
Well, and last year, Ohio State gave up, there were 5 games where they gave up 1 score, and 3 of those were field goals. And so those field goals to ruin the shutout, Youngstown State, I think, scored. Did they score their touchdown late? I can't remember. Or no, they may have scored it actually early, and that's what got Malik Hartford benched in that game. But, 5 games with 1 score given up, another 2 with just 10 points, and I think Missouri scored 2 touchdowns for their 14 maybe. So they're pretty close in those 1-score games that they've given up. You got to figure the defense should be pretty good. And like you said, that non-conference schedule, the schedule is, honestly, Tom, I should have made this 2 shutouts in the non-conference schedule. I'm just going to say it, honestly. And the thing is, like with all of these starters coming back, those second-teamers would be starters this year in a normal year. So they should be able to, this is not your typical second-team defense. So I think when you get those second-teamers in there for the offense, or not the offense, but when the opponent is just still trying to get that fourth quarter score, you're going to have people on the Ohio State defense, second-teamers, third-teamers, trying to show that they belong, and certainly not going to want to give up that score. So 2 shutouts. Congratulations to them. That is a done deal. Book it. Go ahead and book it.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I'm flashing back to 2 really not very memorable Ohio State games that always pop into my head when I'm thinking about shutouts. And one of them was 1990, I think 1998, something like that. Ohio State was playing Illinois at home, and this was a terrible Illinois team. And they were up 41-0, something like that, in the closing minutes, and had a walk-on quarterback in, and we're just trying to basically, run the clock out, and the quarterback fumbled or got strip sacked or something, and Illinois ran it back for a touchdown. So that killed a shutout for Ohio State in the closing seconds. I believe it was also like a 38-point line, so Ohio State then didn't cover, which I'm sure made lots of people real happy. There was an Illinois game in the early 2010s where Illinois finished with 2 points because it was a safety. So you can get that happen. And then the last thing that it makes me think of, Tony, is, do you remember, it must have been 2017, I think, at Rutgers, where this was one of the terrible, terrible Chris Ash Rutgers teams, and it was a shutout into the closing minutes, and then Rutgers sent out the field goal unit for a 40-something yard field goal, like at the gun, and it's 49-0, and it's like, this is the saddest possible sad field goal, and they doinked it and missed it, and they ended up with the shutout. But, even in a moment like that, you've completely dominated the game. It's 49-0 or whatever it was. And if you get the sad field goal, that costs you the shutout. So I think there's just enough different stupid ways that could not happen, that it's not likely that it's going to happen. But this defense, with all the stuff he talked about and the, let's call it, Michiganian non-conference schedule this year, I mean, if it's going to happen, this is the year it's going to happen.
56-0, that classic in 2017 at Rutgers. Next one, Tom, here is something that hasn't happened in at least the last 15 years. And I wish CFBstats.com would go back further, but they only go back to 2009. And the way they have some really specific stats that I like to use, and I can't find them anywhere else. So this has not happened since, like I said, in the last 15 years. And that's 2 running backs, them being Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, will each have multiple 50-yard carries this season. Now, it has been a decade since Ohio State has had 2 players with at least 2 rushes of 50 yards or more, and that was 2014 with Ezekiel Elliott, who had 5, JT Barrett, who had 2, and Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde did it the year before with 2 each. But I couldn't find, and I wasn't, look, this is a daily piece. I'm not going to do too much research on the last time, but I'm putting in a little bit of legwork. But it hasn't happened since, and I don't know that it happened in 2008 with Brandon Sane and Beanie Wells. No, I don't think Brandon Sane was jumping off for 2 50-yard carries that year. So, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. Now, Henderson has 6 50-yard carries in his career. Quinshon Judkins has just 2, has not had one since his freshman season. So, feels... You look at that, and like, of course, those 2 guys are going to have 2 50-yard rushes this season, but we haven't seen it at Ohio State, possibly, Tom, in ever.
This one feels not particularly likely, just because I think, having done the bold prediction shows over the years, we always will look at that, and it's like, oh, he's going to run for 50 yards, and it's like, well, they're playing some terrible MAC team. Of course, everyone's going to have a 97-yard touchdown. And here's the thing about long runs, like, you don't get that many opportunities. If the ball's on your side of the field, then you can do it. If it is across the 50, it is impossible to have a 50-yard run. That really limits your time. And if the opponent is pinned back and punts and you get the ball on your plus 49, well, you can't do it. It is impossible to do it no matter how fast you are or how bad the opponent is. And it's just, big plays are not as common as I think people think they are. You'll see long gains, and as you said, 6 of these rushes for Travion Henderson, but Travion Henderson's been around for 3 years, so that's 2 a year for him, and just 2 for Quinshon Judkins. I think to get 4 of them and 2 of them each this year, if it happens, that's probably a good thing for Ohio State, obviously, but yeah, this is another one where you could have, Quinshon Judkins could have 4 runs of 40 yards, but they're all between 40 and 48 yards, and then you don't hit it. So, yeah, this is one that I think is sneaky not likely to happen.
I'm just looking to see the last time Ohio State actually had at least 4 50-yard rushes, and it was 2021. They had 6, but that was in 2019, Tom. They had 9, which is... good job by Justin Fields and J.K. Dobbins, and probably Master Teague had 1 or 2 in there as well. But no, certainly not likely. But Tom, that's why they're kind of bold. They're a little bold. Next one, much more bold, Tom, because it has been 10 years since this happened. somebody other than a quarterback will throw a touchdown pass for the Buckeyes. Now, I think we talked about this on one of the recent morning shows, but that was, maybe we didn't. I don't know, Tom. We do so many shows. Evan Spencer to Michael Thomas in the playoff game, the Sugar Bowl against Alabama. That was a huge play, obviously, and one that has will live forever. It's time we see another 2009, 2010. The Buckeyes did it. Devere Posey threw one to Duron Carter. Jordan Hall, that guy scored every which way, threw a touchdown pass. But it has been since 2014. I'm thinking it's time, Tom, and even to increase the boldness, I even said who it was going to be. I predicted who it will be. It will be Emeka Ibuka on a little jet sweep to Jeremiah Smith. Now, I don't know if it's going to be one of Jeremiah Smith's 2 touchdowns in that game. Maybe it will, and we'll just knock all of this out. But it's time.
Yeah, and that seems crazy that it could possibly have been pushing 10 years since that's happened. You think back to, we were both Ohio State students in the 90s and remember Michael Wiley throwing for 5 touchdowns, something like that. I mean, that used to be a fairly commonplace thing. And, you still see it with the Philly special play, but a lot of times that's on a 2-point conversion. I was thinking through, you get into multiple overtimes and you're going to be looking for so many 2-point plays, but I guess those wouldn't technically count here because those aren't touchdowns, or they'd be conversions. So, I don't know that there's anyone in my mind that is, are there any converted quarterbacks in the skill position rooms that I'm not thinking of?
No, other than Jack Sawyer.
Other than Jack Sawyer, that's true. Oh man, Jack Sawyer does not score a touchdown, but accounts for a touchdown. That would be a real
Put him
twist.
at Wildcat.
Yeah. Now, are they going to run a 2-quarterback formation at some point? I mean, they certainly could. They have enough quarterbacks, I guess. Well, if a quarterback lines up as a running back, does that count? No. Okay,
No.
so it has to be a non-quarterback. All right. Yeah. This is one. I mean, to predict who it is going to be and who it's going to go to is clinically insane.
Thank you.
That's ludicrous. That is definitely the least likely thing to be exactly correct. But just for this to happen, this is another one that feels like it should happen much more than it does. So, yeah, I will say, less than 50% to hit just in general on this happening this year. But yeah, to predict it to be Emeka Ibuka, and to predict it going to Jeremiah Smith. Tony, if that happens, I will in fact give you credit for predicting correctly something bold.
Well, there you go. First time for ever. Tom, I will say, do you know how many times Chip Kelly has had this happen in his career? If you want to take a stab at a random number out there as an FBS coach.
As an FBS coach, I'm going to say, I'm trying to think back to Oregon. I mean, Oregon, you think about lots of razzle-dazzle there. I'm going to say the answer is either 12 or 0.
The answer is 0, Tom. Never as a coordinator or a head coach at Oregon or UCLA has he had a non-quarterback throw a touchdown. Now, there have been some attempts here and there and some completions not in the end zone, but never a touchdown. So he is due as well. Here's one for you, Tom. The last time this happened, again, 10 years ago, not for Jim Knowles, but for an Ohio State assistant coach. Jim Knowles will win the Broyles Award as the nation's top assistant coach. I think there's going to be a ton of attention. All eyes are going to be on him and this defense, and if they respond, then he's going to get most of the credit for it, along with some of with the players. But you got to give the credit for an award to the guy that is eligible for the award, basically. And we already know they're going to pitch a couple of shutouts in the regular season. We know that Jack Sawyer is going to score a touchdown. We know that Denzel Burke is going to have a great day against Julian Fleming, as we've talked about. But Knowles was I believe, a semifinalist or a finalist previously. He was a semifinalist for the award last year. The last Ohio State coach to win it was Tom Herman in 2014. Jim Haycock won it in 2007. Past Ohio State defensive coordinators who were finalists Fred Puggich in 98, robbed. Mark D'Antonio in 2002, robbed. Jeff Hafley in 2019, arguably robbed. And so now it is time for Jim Knowles to finally stop the robberies.
Well, this is a good one because he sort of fits the profile of the kind of guy that wins this award, where you've had a multi-year sort of slow narrative arc. He came to Ohio State with a reputation as something of a defensive guru. And then you've had over the span of a couple of years, this kind of gradual arc from they were terrible multiple years before he got there, to they were pretty good his first year, to they were very good in his second year. And now potentially we're looking at, incredible, great, best of all time, potentially kind of conversation around the defense this year. And for a team that I think is broadly expected to be a top 2-ish team in the nation, that kind of narrative, that kind of improvement over the course of multiple years might be enough to overcome the, Ohio State Big Ten Coach of the Year thing, where it's like, well, you have the best players. Of course you should have the best offense, defense, team, whatever. I think you have this is sort of shaping up to be the year where that narrative arc kind of peaks for him, where it keeps getting better. You look at the year-over-year trends, and it's better and better and better. And, is some of that going to be the fact that they've got all these veterans back this year? Yes. Is some of that going to be the fact that they added Caleb Downs in the transfer portal? Yes. Is a lot of that going to be, hey, Jim Knowles is pretty good at this and now has had these guys for a couple of years, and they can keep implementing more and more and more stuff and maybe getting a little bit more complex with the defense? Also, yes. So, this is another one where, yeah, sure, there's lots of people. There are going to be people who would never vote for an Ohio State coach to win this because, look, of course, anyone could do it with Caleb Downs and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Denzel Burke and yada, yada, yada. But I think that the results potentially this year could be so good that, are you going to vote for a Georgia assistant instead of Jim Knowles? Just like, guess what? Georgia has good football players too. So, yeah, I like this one. I think, this is another one where if you're picking one guy, what would I don't think they offer odds on, well, I say that now and I'm sure that they do, but, what would the odds be on a Jim Knowles Broyles Award this year? Plus 800, plus 600, something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, and he'd be one of the top 5 favorites, certainly.
Yeah.
I will say,
I mean, he certainly would be a favorite, but it's certainly not an even money thing. So, yeah, call it a 15% chance he does this. So, yes, certainly possible. I think you got a lot of stuff lining up for it to happen. But there's a lot of assistant coaches out there, Tony, and only one can win.
Is that right? It's not Broyles Awards?
You'll have to take it up with Frank Broyles. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry.
Jim Knowles was a finalist in 2021, semifinalist last year. You just hope, Tom, in a reference that you will understand, he's not the Susan Lucci of the Broyles Award.
Didn't she eventually win one? I think she did.
Well, then you hope he is eventually the Susan Lucci of the Broyles Award. Tom, you are correct. I wonder if Tom knows that Susan actually did win one. So, nerd. Anyway, the last one, Tom, that I want to talk about, which is something that has never happened before, at least in terms of the modern era of Ohio State football. And I went back to like 1950. 4 different Ohio State quarterbacks will account for touchdowns this season. This is something where we've had 3 several times, most recently, and I wrote most recently in 2019, and somebody corrected me and said, no, 2020, and I looked at the 2019 or the 2020 stats, and only one quarterback threw a pass. I forgot that both C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller rushed for touchdowns that year. My apologies. But I'm sure I didn't miss any other information in all of my research. And like I said, I went back. I even, I've got like a 1957 graph here where 9 different players threw passes. And back then, anybody threw passes because there was no real, like, you are the number one quarterback. The number one quarterback in 1957 threw 41 passes. Frank Kremlis. We all remember him. But this is something that I don't know that it's the most bold thing here, but maybe it should be since it's never happened before. And this is, I 3 seems like a shoe in. 4 seems like, well, if you really like one of your freshmen, won't they at least do something once? And so I feel like if there's ever a year to have it done, it's this year.
I think you've got, between having 5 quarterbacks on the roster and the fact that you've got some pretty talented quarterbacks on the roster, and the fact that they have talked about needing to play depth, and the fact that you have to deal with the realities of the transfer portal and keeping guys happy and making people feel involved. I know this hasn't happened, but I would be a little surprised if it didn't happen this year, because you got to figure, okay, let's say Will Howard is starting. Okay, so Will Howard is probably going to account for a touchdown at some point during the course of the season if he stays healthy. Okay, so there's one. Devin Brown, you're going to play him a bunch. You're going to have him on the field. He's going to get one. Okay, there's 2. Lincoln Keenholz. Whoever your third quarterback is, whether it's Lincoln Keenholz or Julian Saint, whoever it is, that guy's going to get some at some point. So then you just have one of those other guys, and then you're going to play Aaron Noland 4 games this year. I'm sure you're planning to redshirt him, but you're going to play him in 4 games this year. You're telling me that Aaron Noland is not going to account for a touchdown at some point? I think it's more likely that 5 quarterbacks account for a touchdown this year than, certainly than only 2, and maybe then only 3. It feels like, because of the realities of college football now, with the transfer portal, with the fact that you can play in 4 games in the regular season, it feels like you're gonna have, 3 seems like the absolute floor this year. And 4, Julian Saint is probably, either Julian Saint or Lincoln Keenholz is going to get some, and then the other guy is going to play in the Akron game, in the Western Michigan game, in the Marshall game. Someone's going to play in those moments, and you're just saying account for. You're not saying throw for. And so, all of these guys can run. So all you need is the 6-yard bootleg from the 6-yard line, and boom, you've got it. So I think, for something that hasn't happened going back to 1950 and beyond, probably ever, this feels shockingly likely to happen.
Now, I will say 5 quarterbacks accounting for touchdowns has happened 6 times. I was only looking for 4. You look at the way things are going to go, and they're going to run their quarterbacks. And like I said, Jack Miller, C.J. Stroud both had rushing touchdowns. C.J. Stroud's came from 54, 57 yards. So it can happen from any distance. So it doesn't seem that unlikely. But before we go, Tom, the most, which is the least likely, as you remember all of these that we've gone through? Do you think it's
just for the listeners at home, why don't you run through them just in a sort of shorthanded way?
Okay. 4 different quarterbacks account for touchdowns. Jim Knowles wins the Broyles. A player other than a quarterback throws a touchdown. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson have multiple 50-yard rushes each. 2 regular season shutouts. A Jack Sawyer touchdown. Jeremiah Smith has 2 touchdowns in a regular season game. And, I almost gave out tomorrow's. I won't do that. So of those, is it the Jack Sawyer?
The least likely? Yeah, Jack Sawyer feels like that's just going to... Jack Sawyer probably is the least likely, just because it takes... not that it's unlikely that Ohio State defensive lineman's going to do it, and not even that it's necessarily unlikely that he in particular would do it. It just, that's sort of a random thing. The Knowles one is probably up there. Some of these are in that kind of 10% kind of range, where Knowles doing it, Sawyer, I think, the 2 rushes of 50 yards each is not particularly likely to hit. So there's a few of them that I think are not super, super likely to hit. But I'm going to say Sawyer, but Sawyer and Knowles are both kind of in that range of, 1 in 8 chance, 1 in 10 chance, something like that.
So then I think we would agree that Jeremiah Smith is the most likely time. Is that where you are as well?
I would say that, yeah.
So like a 1-5, 1-2, 1-1.
Oh, yeah, one
2-1.
in greater than 50% chance. I'm gonna say, I'll say 3-4 chance that happened.
All right, there you go. From Tom, or almost just copying my predictions, like always. Anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up on this video if you're watching it now. And if you want to give us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast platform of choice, we would appreciate that as well. And of course, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We are in the last few days of our annual sale that you can pick up an annual subscription right now. It's going to run out on Father's Day. I think we'll run it through Father's Day. So if you want to get something for your dad or have your kids get something for you, that's a perfect gift. So check that out. And that will do it for us. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.